You're listening to The Observing Eye. Pirate radio for the mind. Coming at you fresh from the computer hell cabin.
Hello, you beautiful lot. It is Sunday, the 20th of October, 2024, and you're listening to episode 87 of The Observing Eye, coming at you live from the computer hell cabin. Every week we get psychological, philosophical, and all manner of introspective. I'm David, and today we're going to take a closer look at something that's become almost a staple of contemporary culture, the self-help industry. From best-selling books and motivational speakers to social media influencers and life coaches, self-help has permeated everywhere. But while this industry promises to offer guidance, empowerment, and the tools for personal transformation, it also has a darker side, one that often goes unnoticed or unchallenged. In this episode, we are exploring the hidden dangers of self-help culture. I'm going to talk about why self-help is so appealing, but also why it can sometimes do more harm than good. We'll be looking at how the industry often promotes quick fixes to complex problems, and how it can lead to unrealistic expectations that might leave you feeling worse than when you started. We'll also touch on some of the deeper issues, like the way self-help often pushes extreme personal responsibility, making us feel that every success or failure in life is entirely within our control. But is it really? And what happens when we don't reach those idealized versions of ourselves that these books and seminars so often sell us? Then, of course, there's the question of money. Money. How much of this industry is really about helping people, and how much of it is about turning a profit by feeding into our insecurities? We'll also explore the rise of self-help gurus and influencers who've amassed huge followings, and why blind trust in these figures can sometimes be risky. Now, don't get me wrong, self-help isn't all bad. I'm sure there's some of you out there going, but David, isn't your podcast self-help? Well, I'd like to think it's not. I'd like to think it's more like informational and trying to be a bit balanced about some of these ideas. But if you want to label me self-help, then I have no control over that, I guess. I think that there are some truly valuable insights and approaches out there that can come from some of this self-help landscape, but it is important to take a critical look at what we are consuming. By the end of this episode, I hope to give you a more balanced perspective on how to navigate self-help culture without falling into its potential traps. So if you've ever bought a self-help book, I'm sure many of you out there listening to this have, if you've attended a seminar or you've scrolled through motivational quotes on Instagram, we're starting early today, this episode is definitely for you. We're going to break it all down. What works, what doesn't, and what you should watch out for. Okay, let's get into it. The first major issue with self-help culture is the false promise of quick fixes. I think we've all seen it. The bold headlines, the catchy book titles, the promises of 5 simple steps to change your life, or unlock your potential in 30 days. These messages are everywhere, and if you're anything like me, you've probably been tempted to believe that change really can be that easy. But of course, here is the thing. It generally isn't. Self-help, as it's so often packaged, sells us on the idea that complex, deeply ingrained issues can be solved quickly, almost effortlessly. Whether it's overcoming anxiety, becoming more confident, or achieving success, the implication is that there's a simple, straightforward formula. Just follow these steps and voila, you are fixed. And who wouldn't want that? We all lead busy lives. We want fast solutions. It's natural. But life isn't an algorithm or a step-by-step guide. Real meaningful change is often slow, messy, and to be honest, very uncomfortable. Yet, so much of the self-help industry is built around avoiding that discomfort. Let's talk about self-esteem and confidence, for example. It's very common to see advice like, just repeat these affirmations every morning, or act as if you're already confident that it'll eventually come. Fake it till you make it. Now, on the surface, that doesn't sound harmful. And to be fair, for some people, affirmations or certain behavioral tricks might help in small ways. But when we reduce everything as complex as self-esteem, something often shaped by years of life experiences, family dynamics, and even trauma, if we boil those down to a quick fix solution like saying a few positive phrases in the mirror, we are vastly oversimplifying the problem. We're glossing over the deeper work that often needs to be done to address the root of this issue. Now, I'm not saying that all self-help strategies are completely useless. There are certainly techniques and approaches that can help nudge us in the right direction. But the idea that you can change your entire mindset or transform deeply held beliefs overnight is frankly misleading. It sets people up for disappointment. You follow all the steps, you do the work, at least as it's presented, and when things don't change as quickly as promised, you feel like a failure. And what do? You blame yourself. You think, well, maybe I didn't try hard enough. Maybe I'm not good enough. But in reality, the failure isn't on your part. The failure is in the promise of the quick fix. And this is where we get into another layer of the problem. The way that these quick fix solutions actually perpetuate a cycle of dependency. Now think about this for a minute. You buy one book or attend one seminar, hoping it'll be the thing that finally unlocks your potential. But it doesn't. So what happens next? You go looking for the next book, the next course, the next fucking guru, thinking, okay, this is the one that'll work. And the cycle continues. You're chasing a solution that might not exist in the way that it's being sold to you. I think it's important to acknowledge here that some of these approaches might work for certain people, at least in the short term. Maybe you do get a burst of motivation. Maybe some strategies help you break out of a rut for a while. But if the deeper work isn't being addressed, that motivation fades and you're back to square one. Real change, whether it's in your mindset, your habits, or your relationships, takes time. It requires patience, persistence, and sometimes even professional help. There is no shame in that. But the self-help industry rarely emphasizes this. Instead, it's all about the allure of quick results. And here's where it gets even trickier. By pushing these quick fix solutions, self-help culture often sidesteps the deeper, sometimes more painful reality of real personal growth. The reality is that facing our challenges, whether they're emotional, psychological, or behavioral, isn't easy. It's uncomfortable. It might involve therapy, deep introspection, or even confronting things about ourselves that we'd rather avoid. But that's exactly why these quick fixes are so seductive. They offer a way to bypass the discomfort. They tell you that you don't need to sit with your pain or deep dive into the roots of your problems. You just need a simple hack to reframe your thinking or a strategy to trick your brain into believing you've already changed. And while that can sometimes help in the moment, it often leaves the core issue unresolved. You're essentially putting a band-aid on something that requires much deeper attention. Oh, quick, he's been stabbed with a sword. Put a plaster on it. It's not going to work. So what's the takeaway here? It's not that all self-help is bad, or that every strategy is doomed to fail. But we need to approach it with a critical eye. We need to be realistic about what these quick fixes can, and more importantly, can't do. They might offer a starting point or a bit of temporary relief, but they're not a substitute for the real, often more difficult work of personal growth. And that's okay. Real change is hard. It's supposed to be. And it's worth reminding ourselves that taking the slow, deliberate path doesn't mean we're failing. It means we're doing it right. And now, a word from our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Athletic Greens. No, it's not at all, actually. It's sponsored by me and my book, which is out on Amazon, and you can purchase it as a paperback or on the Kindle, and it sits very much alongside this podcast. So if you're interested in philosophy and psychology and ways that these ideas can be applied to our lives in general, then the book is a really great place to get some theory and some practical applications of it. The premise of the book, we go through a few different scenarios. We talk about authenticity, about gratitude, about letting go of stuff. And there's a lot of stoicism, there's some Buddhism in there, there's all sorts of philosophy and theology that covers this stuff. And the end point of it is for you to be able to reflect upon yourself and whether you are living according to how you would want to live organically, or whether you've adopted all of these frameworks and ideas that come from the external. God knows there's enough of those that hit us every day. So if you're interested in the podcast, if you're interested in that sort of thing, some philosophy, some psychology, and some actual uses of them in day-to-day living, then go and buy my book on Amazon. You have to just search The Observing Eye, or I will put a link in the show notes for you to go and have a look at that as well. And I'm hoping that you will find it useful. So yeah, go buy my book. Subliminal messaging. Buy my book. You will buy it. Yeah, but see what you think. Or don't. It's entirely up to you. There's no pressure. I have no expectation here. It is out into the world and I have let go of it. So it is just there. It exists. And you may enjoy it if you so choose. Thank you for your time. And we now return to the transmission. In the last section, we explored the allure and dangers of quick fixes in self-help culture and why real personal growth is usually more complex and challenging than it's often presented. Now we're going to shift gears a bit and dig into another major issue that runs deep in the self-help world, the burden of extreme personal responsibility. Self-help at its core often emphasizes the idea that you are in control of your destiny, that you alone have the power to change your life. This message can feel incredibly empowering at first. It's all about taking charge of your life, right? We hear phrases like, you are the master of your destiny, or if you want to change your life, you need to change yourself. I don't know why I slipped into Skeletor mode there. You are the master of your fate. On the surface, on the surface, stay on script. These ideas seem positive, even liberating. They tell us that we're not victims of our circumstances, that we have the ability to take control and shape our future. But here's where it gets tricky. The notion of extreme personal responsibility often comes with a hidden downside. It can lead to a crushing sense of blame when things don't go as planned. Because if you're entirely responsible for your success, then by that logic, you are also entirely responsible for your failures. And this is where self-help culture can start to feel less empowering and more suffocating. Let's say you've been following all the steps laid out in a self-help book. You've set your goals, you've visualized your success, you're getting up at 5 a.m., taking a nice bath, and you've put in all the work. But then, despite your best efforts, you don't achieve the results that you were promised. You don't get that promotion. You don't lose the weight. Your relationships don't improve. What happens then? If you've bought into the idea that you have total control over your life, the natural conclusion is that you failed. You didn't work hard enough, or you didn't want it badly enough, or you somehow sabotaged yourself. The blame falls squarely on your shoulders. But is that really the whole picture? Is life really that simple? The reality, of course, is that life is far more complex than the self-help narrative of personal responsibility allows for. Yes, taking responsibility for your actions and your decisions is important. There's absolutely no denying that. We need to have a level of accountability. But this extreme version of personal responsibility, the idea that every single outcome in your life is within your control, completely ignores the larger context in which we all live. That being, of course, what about the external factors? What about the things that you can't control? We live in a world where there are countless variables at play. Your background, your environment, your upbringing, your access to resources, your mental health. The self-help industry often glosses over these realities. It downplays the impact of social structures, economic conditions, and even chance. It's as if success is entirely a matter of willpower, and if you don't succeed, well then it must be your fault. You just didn't manifest it hard enough. Now imagine telling someone who grew up in poverty or someone struggling with a serious mental health condition, that the only reason they haven't succeeded is because they haven't tried hard enough. It's a massively damaging message. It ignores the very real barriers that people face. And it's not just harmful on an individual level. It reinforces the idea that systemic problems like inequality, racism, or lack of access to healthcare are irrelevant. That if people just worked harder, these issues wouldn't matter. But of course, that's simply not true. This is where the idea of victim blaming starts to creep in. When we push this extreme version of personal responsibility, we can end up blaming people for circumstances beyond their control. If someone is struggling financially or dealing with chronic illness or facing discrimination, the message they often hear from self-help culture is that they just need to change their mindset or be more positive or just put in a bit more work. Because of course, working a bit harder solves racism, right? And of course, when that doesn't work, they're left feeling even more isolated, as though their struggles are a personal failing. Now, of course, I'm not saying that personal responsibility isn't important. In fact, it's crucial. Taking ownership of our actions, being proactive about our choices, these are all valuable and necessary for growth. But the danger comes when we push that idea to its extreme, to the point where it becomes an unrealistic burden. Because let's face it, none of us has complete control over our lives. Sometimes things happen that are entirely outside of our hands. Life throws us curveballs, and no amount of positive thinking or hard work is going to change that. Now, this brings me to a key point. We need to make space for the reality that life is complex, that we live in a web of influences, and that sometimes things don't go the way we want. Not because we didn't try hard enough, but because life is unpredictable. It's okay to acknowledge that there are forces beyond our control. Doesn't mean we're powerless, just means that we're human. And I think this is where self-help culture often misses the mark. Instead of teaching us how to cope with uncertainty, how to navigate challenges that are beyond our control, it often doubles down on the idea that if we just tweak our mindset or follow the right formula, we can fix everything. But of course, life doesn't work that way. Sometimes the most empowering thing we can do is accept that we can't control everything and instead focus on how we respond to the challenges that we face. So what does all of that mean? Yes, personal responsibility matters, but it's not the whole story. It's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. We need to be careful not to fall into the trap of thinking that we alone are responsible for everything that happens to us. We need to acknowledge the role that external factors play and, more importantly, be kind to ourselves when things don't go the way that we'd hoped. Because sometimes it's not about working harder or wanting it more. Sometimes it's about recognizing that life is messy and unpredictable and full of variables that we can't control. And that's okay. Now, when we talk about self-help, it's very easy to think of it in terms of personal growth, empowerment, and the idea of bettering yourself. But let's not forget something. Self-help is also a business, and it's a big one. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry that includes everything from books, seminars, and coaching sessions to online courses, apps, and motivational retreats. There are entire companies built around selling you the idea of personal transformation. But of course, there's a catch. Not just about helping people, it's about making money, and quite a lot of it at that. Now, before we dive deeper, I want to make something very clear at this point. I am not saying that every person or organization involved in the self-help industry is just in it for the cash. There are plenty of well-intentioned people who genuinely want to help others. But we have to acknowledge that when you turn personal growth into a product, something gets lost in translation. The focus shifts from actually helping people to selling them something. And that's when things get problematic. Now let's start with the simple example of self-help books. These are some of the best-selling titles out there. Think about how many times you've walked into a bookstore and seen entire shelves dedicated to them. Everything from how to be more productive to how to attract wealth or how to find your purpose. These books often promise big results, life-changing insights, a roadmap to success, or the key to unlocking your full potential. And honestly, it's tempting to believe them. Who wouldn't want to buy a book that claims to solve your problems in just a few hundred pages? But the thing is that most self-help books follow the same formula. They start by identifying a problem that you probably have, whether it's a lack of confidence, not being as successful as you want to be, or feeling unfulfilled in your relationships. Then they offer a solution, usually presented as simple, actionable steps. And of course, if you follow these steps, you'll achieve the success or happiness you've been looking for. But how often do these books actually deliver on their promises? Sure, they might give you a temporary boost of motivation. You might feel inspired while you're reading them. But more often than not, that feeling fades after a few days or weeks, and you're left right where you started. And that's no accident. It is part of the business model. If a self-help book really did solve all of your problems, you wouldn't need to buy another one. But that's not how the industry works. Instead, it's designed to keep you coming back for more. You finish one book, don't see the results you were promised, so you move on to the next. It's a cycle, one that keeps you spending money on the idea of improvement rather than the improvement itself. And it's not just books. Let's talk about seminars and workshops. These are often advertised as transformative experiences where you'll learn the secrets to success, happiness, or fulfillment. They're usually led by charismatic speakers, self-help gurus who have built entire empires around their personal brand. And these events can be incredibly expensive. We're talking hundreds, even thousands of dollars for a weekend workshop. The problem is that just like the books, these seminars often don't deliver the lasting change they promise. You might leave feeling pumped up and motivated and ready to take on the world, but once that initial high wears off, you are left with the same challenges that you had before you went to the workshop in the first place. And when that happens, what's the solution? According to the self-help industry, the answer's simple. You just need to attend another seminar, sign up for another course, or hire a life coach. The answer is always more of the same shit. And this is where the commercialization of self-help becomes really problematic. Not just about offering people tools for growth, it's about creating a constant demand for more products, more services, and more solutions. The industry doesn't sell you a solution. It sells you the feeling that you're almost there, that you just need one more thing to finally break through. And of course, that one more thing comes at a cost. It's hidden behind a paywall. Of course, not all seminars and workshops are scams. I don't want to cast a blanket across everybody. Some of them can actually be real catalysts for change. But we do have to be cautious about the fact that the primary goal of these events isn't always your growth. Often, it's about building loyalty to the brand and getting you to keep buying whatever they're shilling. This is particularly evident when you look at some of the high-profile self-help gurus out there, whom I shall name none of for fear of litigation. They don't just stop at, but you know who I mean. They don't just stop at books or seminars. They build an entire ecosystem of products. You start with a book, and then you're funneled into a seminar. Then you're encouraged to sign up for a more advanced workshop. Then there's a VIP package that comes with an attractive carriage clock, and maybe even a personal coaching program with one of their specially trained life coaches. All of it is designed to keep you in the loop, continually spending money. And of course, how can we forget the rise of the online courses and apps? Oh, please sign up to this course I've written in 2 days on this fucking digital platform. Self-help has obviously become much more accessible and much more profitable in the past couple of decades. For a monthly subscription, you can have access to a library of personal development videos, guided meditations, productivity hacks, and, whatever your heart desires, really. And while, of course, there's nothing inherently wrong with these platforms, it is worth asking how much of it is truly about helping people and how much of it is just about maximizing profit. The problem with turning self-help into a business is that it often leads to a focus on selling hope rather than providing actual sustainable tools for change. It's about keeping people in a cycle of buying products that promise transformation without necessarily delivering on it. And in doing so, the industry often takes advantage of people who are vulnerable, people who are looking for answers, for guidance, for a way out of their struggles. So where does this leave us? Should we swear off self-help products entirely? Well, not necessarily. There's a lot of good advice out there, and some of it can be genuinely helpful. But we need to be critical consumers. We have to be a bit more philosophical in our consumption around this. We've got to question things that are coming at us. We need to be able to recognize when we are being sold a solution versus when we are being sold a product that promises a solution, but it delivers little more than a temporary motivation. Real growth and change, as we all know, takes time. It requires more than just attending a seminar or reading a book. It requires deep, uncomfortable work, and that is not something you can buy for $20 or a few $100 seminar or anything else. Personal development is not a product to be consumed. It is a process, and is one that does not have a shortcut. Next, I want to take you into another aspect of self-help culture that doesn't always get the attention that it deserves, and that is the perfection trap. If you spent any time consuming self-help content, you will likely have noticed a recurring theme: the relentless pursuit of improvement. You're told that you should always be striving to become your best self, to optimize every aspect of your life. Whether it's your productivity, your health, your relationships, or your mindset, the message is clear. There's always more work to be done. You can always be better. Don't just be happy with who you are. How dare you be content with the present? On the surface, this might seem like a positive message. After all, who doesn't want to improve? Who doesn't want to grow? But here's the problem, of course. Self-help culture often turns this drive for improvement into a never-ending quest for perfection. And that quest is exhausting, disheartening, and ultimately unattainable. Let's start by talking about what I mean when I say the perfection trap. At its core, it's the idea that self-help culture promotes this idealized version of what a successful, happy, and fulfilled person should look like. You know, like the people on the 1960s cigarette adverts, like the Marlboro Man. I am purely successful. My body, my blood is success. The person is highly productive, always positive, physically fit, emotionally balanced, spiritually enlightened, and financially successful. Who the fuck knows anybody like that? I certainly don't. It is the idea that if you work hard enough on yourself, you can become this perfect version of you, someone who has all of it together. But of course, nobody fits that description. Nobody ever has. Nobody ever will. It is an illusion. It is an impossible standard to live up to. And yet self-help content often sells this image as something you should be striving for. The result is that people are left feeling like they are constantly falling short. Like no matter how much they improve, it is never enough. And this, of course, is where the danger lies. Instead of feeling empowered or motivated, people end up feeling inadequate because the bar for success keeps moving. You meditate, but not enough. You eat healthily, but not clean enough. You exercise, but you gotta push harder. You make progress in your career, but you're not rich or famous yet. The goalposts are always shifting, and this constant striving can lead to chronic dissatisfaction with yourself and your life. There is a big difference between wanting to improve and feeling like you're never enough. Self-help culture can blur the lines between these two things. Improvement is one thing, but perfectionism is quite another. And the perfectionism promoted by self-help culture often leads to a cycle of burnout, self-criticism, and frustration. I think many of us have probably felt this pressure at one point or another. You read a self-help book or you follow someone on social media who's promoting these ideals, and you start to feel like, okay, if I just fix this one area of my life, everything else will fall into place. If I just get up at 5 a.m. and have a cold shower and eat like 4 slices of lettuce for breakfast and then say I am a wonderful being into the mirror 7 times, it's all just going to work out great. Of course, making those positive changes can help in certain ways, but life is very rarely that neat. You might fix one thing, but then something else comes up. You improve in one area, but now you're being told that another part of your life needs work. It's like this, I kind of imagine it as a piece of really old pipe, like in an old house. and you fix a leak in one place and then a leak springs up from somewhere else. So you're just dashing around, sticking like electrical tape around pipes. Plumbers, please don't judge me. Just, wrapping pipes in electrical tape and plumber's putty and hoping for the best. It's kind of like, it's whack-a-mole, right? Whack-a-mole. You think you've got everything under control, another little flaw pops up you need to work on. And it is fucking exhausting. And it can start to feel like you're on this treadmill of self-improvement. Like you're just constantly running, but you're never getting anywhere. And then it's massively disheartening, isn't it? Because we don't feel like we're making any progress. We don't feel like we're changing because we're never enough. We're never good enough. Always got to be better. This constant striving for perfection doesn't just affect your mindset. It affects your mental health. Perfectionism is very closely linked to anxiety, depression, and burnout. When you feel like you're never measuring up to this idealized version of yourself, it can lead to feelings of worthlessness and frustration. You might start to ask yourself, why can't I just get it right? Or what's wrong with me? And those are dangerous questions to spiral into, especially when the reality is that there's nothing wrong with you at all. The problem isn't you. The problem is this unrealistic bullshit standard that self-help culture can set. But there's another layer to this that I think is important to explore. And that's the way that self-help culture can make us feel like we should be perfect, that it's somehow unacceptable to be flawed or to struggle. Now, how often, think about this for a minute, because I can't remember the last time I saw it. Not that I go on this shit anymore because it just drives me nuts. How often do you ever hear self-help influencers talk about vulnerability, about failure, or about uncertainty? Like it gets mentioned here and there, but more often than not, the focus is on pushing through, like fucking leveling up and staying positive. And I swear to God, the next person that says rise and grind, I'm just going to fucking punch. I'm sorry. Like that's like I'm totally demonetized. Not I'm monetized anyway. Like just I've expressed an intent to cause violence. Oh dear. But you know what I mean. Like let's take a bit of fucking comedy in this. It drives me nuts. All of these sorts of stuff, like leveling up, like Super Mario collecting the fucking coins. Princess is always in the wrong fucking castle, mate. Like it's bullshit. So I'm getting right. This whole subject annoys me. Like it really, really annoys me. Some of this self-help culture stuff, and I may be getting slightly more passionate than usual in my tone. So please forgive me on that sense. But I do feel that it can be intensely damaging, some of this stuff, and yeah, people need to be aware of it. Really, it's this whole environment where it is not okay to just be a messy, flawed human being. We are told that we should always be optimizing, like we're some sort of fucking machine, like the $6 million man. Just going to defragment myself, and everything will be fine. Now, there's this thing that this can lead to. I'm going to get back on script now. Calm down. Oh, yeah, calm yourself. It's toxic perfectionism, right? And this is the belief that anything less than perfect is unacceptable. You start to see your value as a person tied to your achievements, to how well you're improving yourself. And this, of course, means that we're attaching self-worth to productivity or to success, which inherently is absolute nonsense. It's not something that fluctuates based on how many goals that we've checked off. It is something that we all inherently have. We all have self-worth, whether we believe it or not. And part of the flaws, part of the vulnerabilities that we all have are what makes us inherently human, are what give us our self-worth. There's a lot of strength in those vulnerabilities, in those flaws. You can get a lot out of them. You have to accept that that is a part of who you are. And if you want to change any of those flaws, if you feel they are flaws, or there are parts of you that you want to change, and that's great. Like you can put the work in to do that. But it ain't going to be perfect. There's always going to be flaws. There's always going to be vulnerabilities because that's the human experience. But it is. There is no perfect human. It doesn't work like that. So I guess the question is, what is the way out of this perfection trap? Well, firstly, it is important to recognize that perfection is an illusion. There is no perfect self waiting at the end of a self-help journey. Life is about growth, but it is also about accepting who you are in this moment, even with your imperfections. You can strive for betterment, but you also need to give yourself permission to be imperfect, to have days where you don't feel productive, or where you mess things up, or where you just don't have it all together. And that's absolutely fine. That's part of being human. And it is something that self-help culture doesn't always emphasize enough. Second, it is important to focus on the journey rather than the destination. Instead of seeing self-help as a path to some idealized version of pure self-actualization, try to view it as a tool for ongoing growth and reflection. We are not arriving at a perfect state. This is about learning, adapting, and evolving. It is about being kind to yourself along the way and knowing that change takes time and that if we stumble, that is absolutely fine. And lastly, I think we need to shift the conversation around self-help to include more acceptance and more self-compassion, which I genuinely think is hugely lacking at the moment. It is okay to want to grow and improve, but it's also okay to just be where you are right now. You're not a failure because you haven't reached some arbitrary standard of bullshit success. Oh, I haven't hit my KPIs this quarter. I'm a fucking waste of meat. You are not less valuable because you're not perfect. You are enough as you are. You're a human being. Accept it. It's all right to be vulnerable. Everybody fucking is, including myself. So if you have found yourself caught in this perfection trap, constantly chasing after a better version of yourself, but never feeling like you're getting there, take a step back from that. Give yourself permission to pause, to accept yourself as you are, flaws and all. Because real growth isn't about being perfect. It's about being more you, imperfections and all. Oh, feeling nice and calm now after that little break. I've just snorted a line of lavender. I'm feeling much better. Oh, yes. There we are. Breathe. That's it. Okay, so I'm going to get into another issue that I feel is prevalent within the self-help world, which is the overemphasis on individualism. Now, if there's one message that I feel the self-help culture constantly pushes, it's that you alone are responsible for your success, your happiness, and your life's trajectory. It's all about you. Your mindset, your effort, your choices. That is what determines everything. And while there's a certain, obviously empowering aspect to that message, there is also a danger in it. It puts an enormous amount of pressure on the individual, and more importantly, it sidelines the role that community relationships and external factors play in our lives. So let's break this down a bit. Self-help culture, especially in the West, tends to be rooted in this idea of rugged individualism. It celebrates independence and self-reliance. The underlying message is that if you just work hard enough or think positively enough or adopt the right habits, you can overcome any obstacle. And of course, on the surface, this sounds great. It reinforces the idea that you have control over your life, that you are not a passive victim of circumstance. But what it often fails to acknowledge is that we don't exist in a vacuum. We are social beings living in a world full of interconnected systems, familial, economic, social, political, whether we like it or not. One of the biggest issues with this hyper-individualistic approach is that it overlooks the importance of community relationships and support networks. In the rush to improve ourselves, we can sometimes forget that we actually need other people. No one can go through life completely alone, no matter how much self-help culture tells us we should be able to handle everything on our own. Take, for example, the classic self-help message that you need to find happiness within yourself, that true fulfillment comes from you, not from external sources. Now, there is definitely some truth to that. Learning to cultivate like an inner calm, to be content with yourself, is incredibly valuable. But the problem is that it can sometimes lead to a mentality where we feel like we're not supposed to rely on others, or that seeking help or support is a sign of weakness. We're told to become our own best friend, to solve our own problems. And while that can sound empowering, it creates an unrealistic expectation that we should be able to handle everything on our own. Now, of course, the reality is that we need connection. We need relationships. We need to feel supported, to feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves. And self-help culture, in its focus on the individual, sometimes downplays the importance of those connections. It's almost as if admitting that we need other people is seen as a failure or a weakness, when in fact it is a fundamental part of being human. There's a reason that therapy, support groups, and strong communities are so effective. It's not just about the advice or strategies they offer. It's about knowing that you are not alone in your struggles, that someone else understands what you're going through. And yet, self-help culture often pushes this narrative that you are enough, which while it's true in some contexts, can also be misleading if it makes us think we should never reach out for help. In reality, it's not a failure to need other people, it is a natural part of life. Of course, it isn't just about emotional support, it's also about recognizing the external factors that affect our lives. The hyper-focus on individualism can lead to a dangerous oversimplification of complex problems. For instance, if you are struggling financially, self-help might tell you to focus on your mindset, to visualize abundance, to hustle harder. And while those things might help, they ignore the broader systemic issues that might be at play, like income inequality, lack of access to education, or discrimination. By framing success and failure as purely individual outcomes, self-help culture tends to ignore the realities of the world that we live in. It creates this myth that everyone has an equal shot at success if they just try hard enough. But we know that that's not true. Circumstances matter. Privilege matters. Opportunities, or the lack thereof, matter. But when self-help culture overemphasizes individual responsibility, it can sometimes feel like we're being told that if we're not successful, it's entirely our fault. It doesn't leave much room for the fact that there are real structural challenges that some people face. Now let's look at another way that this individualistic mindset plays out, and that's the idea that you have to solve all of your problems by yourself. Now, in some cases, taking responsibility for our actions and working through our personal challenges is vitally important. But there's a difference between being proactive and being isolated. Self-help culture sometimes presents self-sufficiency as the ultimate goal, as though needing help or relying on others is somehow a sign that you are not strong enough. But of course, the truth is that real strength often comes from knowing when to ask for help and from being able to lean on others when you need support. Life is not meant to be navigated solo. And the more we isolate ourselves in the name of self-reliance, the more disconnected we can become from the very things that sustain us, our relationships, our communities, and our shared experiences. How many times have you felt like you should be able to figure something out on your own, but deep down you just wanted to reach out to someone? Maybe you were struggling with a decision or going through a rough patch, and instead of seeking advice or comfort, you felt like you had to tough it out on your own. That's what this overemphasis on individualism does. It makes us feel like we should be able to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders, even when we don't have to. And this ties back into mental health as well. Self-help culture can sometimes stigmatize asking for help, especially of the professional kind, by promoting the idea that you should be able to fix yourself. But of course, there's no shame in seeking support from a therapist or a counselor or just even a friend that you trust who's got a little bit of emotional intelligence. Recognizing that you need help and reaching out for it is often the most powerful thing that you can actually do for yourself. So what is the takeaway here? It is simple but important. We need to recognize that while self-help can be a valuable tool for personal growth, it is not the whole picture. Growth does not happen in isolation. We are social creatures and our lives are influenced by the world around us, by our relationships, our environments, and external factors that are often beyond our control. Real growth happens when we acknowledge that it's okay to ask for help, that it's okay to lean on others, and that success isn't solely an individual achievement. It is okay to reach out to your community, to your family, or to your friends and say that I need a bit of fucking help here, guys. There's no weakness in that. It is probably one of the strongest things that you can actually do. And let's not forget that the challenges we face aren't always individual problems to solve. Sometimes they're systemic. No amount of positive thinking or manifestation techniques is going to fix that. That's where community, advocacy, and collective action come in. We can't do everything on our own, and it's okay because we're not meant to. It's our penultimate section, and I'd like to spend a little bit of time looking at the rise of self-help gurus and influencers. Now, if you spent any time scrolling through social media or browsing the self-help aisle in any sort of bookshop, you have probably come across a few names that stand out. Figures who have built empires on the promise of personal growth, success, and fulfillment. These are the so-called self-help gurus, motivational speakers, life coaches, and influencers who offer their advice to millions of followers. At first glance, they seem to embody everything self-help is about: success, confidence, and the wisdom to guide others. But the rise of these figures, especially in the digital age, brings with it some serious concerns. Concerns that we often overlook in our eagerness to follow their advice. So let's dive into that a little bit. One of the key issues with self-help gurus is the cult of personality that tends to form around them. These figures often present themselves as the living embodiment of the principles they teach. They're not just offering advice, they're selling an image of what a successful, fulfilled, and enlightened life looks like, usually based on their own experiences. And that's where things start to get tricky. The problem isn't that these people have something valuable to say. Some of them genuinely do, but rather that the advice they give is often presented as universal truth, as though it's the only path to success or happiness. You're not just buying into their books or courses, you're buying into their personal brand. And this brand often includes a carefully curated image of perfection, one that's hard to live up to, especially when life doesn't fit neatly into the mold that they're selling. When we put these gurus on a pedestal, we run the risk of thinking they've found the secret to life. And when someone positions themselves as having all the answers, it becomes easy to stop questioning and start following. Now, this brings us to the rise of social media influencers in the self-help space. Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube have allowed self-help to go viral. With a quick scroll, you can find countless influencers offering advice on everything from productivity hacks to mindfulness tips and manifesting your dreams. On one hand, it's great that self-help content is so accessible, but on the other, it raises some serious questions about credibility and expertise. Many of these influencers aren't trained professionals. They're not psychologists or therapists. They're not experts in human behavior or mental health. And yet they're offering advice that at times can have a profound impact on people's lives. The problem is, because they have massive followings and a strong social media presence, it's easy to assume that they must know what they're talking about. But follower count does not equate to expertise. The influencer effect is powerful. It is driven by charisma, relatability, and often aesthetics. These influencers create a lifestyle that's aspirational. They show us the highlights of their lives, whether it's waking up at 5 a.m. for a workout, fuck that, meditating on a beach, or manifesting a quiche through success through vision boards. But what we don't often see is the hard work, the struggles, the privilege, or the luck that went into achieving those results. It's very easy to buy into the idea that if we just follow their steps, we can have the same success. But of course, life is far messier than that. Another major issue with self-help gurus and influencers is the oversimplification of ideas. Personal growth and mental health and success, these are all very deeply nuanced topics. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. But the content that you often see from these figures tends to reduce everything down to very simple slogans or to quick tips. Think positive, hustle hard, and manifest your reality. But, there's nothing kind of wrong with these ideas in isolation, I guess, but they can become dangerous when they are applied as a blanket solution to every problem. Manifest away your cancer. Doesn't fucking work like that. Honestly, that sort of shit needs to get banned. Seriously. Like telling someone who's struggling with depression to just think positive. Clearly, you've never been fucking depressed. Like, you're oversimplifying their experience, which is deeply insulting in the first place. But, you're also making them feel like they're failing at something as fundamental as their own thoughts. And if you feel like you're failing at thinking, like, what the fuck are you any good at, right? Like, similarly, this idea of promoting that success comes solely from hustling harder just makes people burn out, or that makes them feel inadequate when they're unable to reach the same sort of levels of success as their guru. Of course, life is complicated. We've got to remember that. Mental health challenges and financial struggles and relationship problems, they can't be solved with like a fucking Instagram story or like catchy mantras. But self-help gurus often thrive on selling simplicity because simplicity sells. And this leads me on to another crucial point, the profit motive behind many of these gurus. We mentioned earlier, the self-help industry is worth billions of dollars, and gurus and influencers know how to tap into that. They sell their books and their courses and their retreats and their coaching programs. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with making money, of course, the problem arises when the business starts to overshadow the actual help part of self-help. There are some gurus who create a cycle of dependency where followers feel like they constantly need to buy into the next course or attend the next seminar in order to truly unlock their potential. This is not about giving people the tools to grow on their own. It is about keeping them locked within a guru's ecosystem, spending their monies and never quite giving them the answers that they need. It is always worth asking, is the advice being offered really about helping people? Or is it about selling hope, repackaged into products and programs? And how do we, as consumers of this content, distinguish between genuine guidance and something that's just trying to get us to open our wallets? Now, finally, we need to talk about the risks of putting blind trust in these figures. When we're going through tough times, it is natural to seek out guidance from someone who seems to have it all figured out. But when we place too much faith in a single person's advice, we run the risk of losing our own sense of agency. We stop trusting our own intuition and judgment and instead rely on the word of someone else. In extreme cases, this can even take on a cult-like dynamic where the guru's words are treated as gospel. We've seen it happen with several high-profile self-help figures where their influence becomes so strong that their followers become devoted to their every word, to the point of ignoring red flags or harmful behavior. At the end of the day, no one has all of the answers. No one is perfect, not even the gurus. And it's important to question, to stay critical, and to remember that personal growth is your journey. It's not something you can outsource to somebody else. So where does all of this leave us? Should we avoid all self-help gurus and influences? Well, not necessarily. Some of them do have valuable insights and can serve as a source of inspiration or motivation. But it is important to approach them with a healthy dose of skepticism. Ask yourself, is this person offering advice that resonates with your personal experience? Are they encouraging you to think for yourself, or are they trying to make you dependent on their teachings? Are they transparent about the limitations of their advice, or are they selling a one-size-fits-all solution? And perhaps more importantly, are they profiting more from your dependency than from your growth? We need to be philosophical about this. We need to question what is coming at us. And if we don't necessarily like the answers to those questions, if our gut instinct is telling us to, avoid this like the plague, listen to your gut. The key, of course, with all of this stuff is balance. Take what resonates with you, but don't put anyone on a pedestal. Personal growth is a very deeply personal journey, hence the name. It is okay to seek guidance, but do not forget to trust yourself along the way. As we near the end of our journey, it is time to address unrealistic expectations and the false hope that this culture often creates. Self-help at its core is built on the promise of a better future. It's about transformation, becoming your best self, and unlocking the potential that's supposedly waiting just beneath the surface. And while this can be inspiring, it can also be misleading, because as we all know, life doesn't work out the way that we always hope or expect it to. So let's talk about how self-help culture can sometimes set us up for disappointment, and why managing our expectations is crucial for our well-being. Let's start with why self-help is so compelling. It's all in the promises. Whether it's a book, a seminar, or an influencer's Instagram post, the message is often the same. Follow these steps, adopt these habits, and you will achieve happiness, success, love, wealth, or whatever the fuck it is that they're shilling at that time. These promises tap into our deepest desires and give us hope that we can finally overcome our struggles and achieve the life that we've always dreamed of. Now, of course, here's the thing. Self-help culture isn't just about growth. It's about radical transformation. It's not just improve your habits, it is revolutionize your life. It is not be more productive, it's become a productivity powerhouse. The stakes are always high, and the underlying message is often that you can have it all. You just need the right mindset, the right strategy, or the right guru to guide you. Praise be the guru. This kind of messaging is powerful. It makes us feel like everything we want is within reach. But it also sets us up with incredibly high expectations that are often unrealistic. Now, here's where the problem comes in. When you dive headfirst into self-help with the belief that you can achieve all of these amazing things, whether it's the perfect career, the perfect relationship, or the perfect mindset, you are investing emotionally in a future that might not align with reality. And when things don't work out the way the books or gurus promised, it can be devastating. Let's say, for example, you've been following advice on how to manifest success. You've been visualizing your goals, practicing positive affirmations, and doing everything you're told will attract what you want. But after months or even years of effort, you're still not seeing results. What happens then? You start to wonder if you did something wrong. Maybe you weren't thinking positively enough. Maybe you didn't follow the steps perfectly. Or worse, you might begin to feel like there's something wrong with you. This is the danger of false hope. Self-help can sometimes create the illusion that you have complete control over your life, and that with the right tools, you can mold your reality in whatever shape you want. But of course, we are not taking into account anything about the complexity of life with that mindset. External factors play a huge role in the outcomes we experience, and when self-help culture ignores these realities, it can lead to a sense of failure when things don't go according to plan. Another issue is that self-help culture often overpromises and underdelivers. It offers big, bold claims in Comic Sans, 10 steps to becoming a millionaire, how to find your soulmate in 30 days, unlock the secret to limitless confidence. If I ever start doing episodes like that, by the way, just fucking cancel me, seriously. Time for me to step away from this. Of course, how often do these claims hold up in real life? Well, they don't, do they? There may be a few success stories, but for most people, the reality falls very, very far short of that promise. This, of course, creates a dangerous cycle. You buy into one self-help program, you follow all of the advice. When it doesn't work, you start looking for the next program. Maybe the next book or seminar will be the one that finally clicks. And when that doesn't work, you look for the next. It is a constant cycle of hope and disappointment, and it is emotionally exhausting. And over time, it can leave you feeling more stuck than when you started. The problem isn't necessarily that self-help advice is bad. Like, much of it can be helpful, but it's the way that it's often marketed with grand promises and life-altering guarantees, setting up unrealistic expectations. And of course, those expectations are very rarely met. And this, of course, brings me on to the concept of hope fatigue. This is the emotional exhaustion that comes from repeatedly getting your hopes up, only to have them dashed when things don't turn out as expected. In the context of self-help, hope fatigue happens when you keep investing in the promise of transformation, but the results never seem to match the effort you're putting in. You start to feel disillusioned, not just with the self-help industry, but with yourself. After all, if you're following all the steps and still not seeing the results, doesn't that mean the problem lies with you? That sense of personal failure can lead to a loss of hope, a feeling that maybe real change is impossible, or that happiness and success are always just out of reach. It is a heavy emotional toll, and it can lead to a downward spiral of self-doubt, anxiety, and even depression. The constant pursuit of a better life becomes exhausting, and the emotional highs and lows of self-help culture can take a serious toll on your mental health. So how do we navigate this? How do we engage with self-help in a way that inspires us without setting us up for disappointment? The key is to strike a balance between hope and realism. First, it is important to manage your expectations. Self-help can offer useful tools, but it is not a magic solution. Real lasting change takes time, effort, and a lot of patience. There are no overnight fixes, and sometimes even with the best intentions and the most diligent effort, life will not turn out the way we hoped. And that is okay to accept that. Secondly, we need to be wary of anyone or anything that promises dramatic results with minimal effort. If it sounds too good to be true, then it very probably is. Personal growth is a journey, and it's a messy one at that, and it is filled with setbacks and challenges and moments of uncertainty. That is not something that can be glossed over with a catchy slogan or a 5-step process. And lastly, we need to accept that some things are outside of our control. Self-help culture often downplays the role of external factors, things like luck, and timing and the general complexities of the universe. But acknowledging these factors doesn't make us powerless. In fact, it can help us to be kinder to ourselves when things don't go according to plan. It can remind us that failure isn't always a personal shortcoming and that we are not alone in facing life's challenges. So, where are we after all of this then? It's important to hold on to hope. And by that, I mean real hope. Hope that things can get better, that we can grow and change, that we can find fulfillment and happiness in our own ways. But we need to be careful not to chase false hope, the kind that promises quick fixes and dramatic transformations, because that kind of hope is fragile. And when it breaks, it can leave us feeling worse than before. Instead, let us embrace a more grounded hope, one that recognizes the value of small incremental progress, one that understands that life is unpredictable and often messy, and one that knows that real change comes from sustained effort, from learning and adapting, and from being kind to ourselves along the way. In the end, self-help can be a useful tool, but it is not the whole picture. It's one piece of a much larger puzzle, and it's important to approach it with a balanced, realistic mindset. When we do that, we can harness the power of self-help without falling into the traps of unrealistic expectations and false hope. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all I have to say on the dangers of self-help culture. We've explored the hidden dangers of self-help culture, from the false promises of quick fixes and the burden of extreme personal responsibility, to the commercialization of personal growth, the perfection trap, the overemphasis on individualism, and the rise of self-help gurus. The first takeaway from this episode is the importance of discernment. Self-help is not a one-size-fits-all solution. What works for one person might not work for another, and that's absolutely fine. We all have unique experiences, circumstances, and challenges, and personal growth doesn't follow a rigid formula. When we are engaging with self-help, whether it's a book, a seminar, or following an influencer, it's important to ask ourselves, does this resonate with my personal experience? Does this advice make sense in the context of my life? And perhaps more importantly, is this advice making me feel better or worse about myself? If a particular approach is helping you, then that's great. But if it's making you feel like you're not enough or that you're constantly falling short, it might be time to reconsider whether that advice is really serving you in a positive way. Another key takeaway is that life is messy. Self-help culture often tries to sell us on the idea of a perfectly curated life, where everything is under control and every problem has a solution. But in reality, life is full of uncertainty, complexity, and challenges that don't always have easy answers. It's important to embrace the mess. You don't have to have everything figured out. You don't need to be in a constant state of improvement. Some days it's enough just to get through the day, and that doesn't mean that you're failing at life. It just means that you're human. True personal growth doesn't come from chasing an idealized version of yourself. It comes from learning to navigate the ups and downs of life with a bit of resilience and self-compassion. It's about making small, meaningful changes over time and accepting yourself as you are, even as you strive to grow. And of course, we need to balance hope with realism. Self-help is at its best when it inspires hope. Hope that we can grow, that things can get better, that we can overcome challenges. But we need to be careful not to get caught up in false hope. We need to manage our expectations and recognize that life doesn't always unfold the way that we want or expect it to. Real change takes time, effort, and patience. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, things do not go as planned. That doesn't mean that we failed. It means that life is unpredictable. By balancing hope with realism, we can stay grounded, avoid unnecessary disappointment, keep moving forward with a little bit of self-compassion. I want to thank all of you for joining me today. As always, your attention, your awareness, your presence, your mind is greatly appreciated. And I hope that there's been something in here that's been useful to you on some level. Of course, a big thank you to everybody who has subscribed to the podcast in the past week or so. So that's a huge thank you for your support, and it's you'll deeply appreciate taking your efforts and your energy in that. And it's great to see that people are finding this stuff useful and responding in a positive way. So thank you very much to all of you who have done that. You know who you are. I can't announce your names because of GDPR, but yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody who's done that. Now I'm going to go off script this week. I'm going to go off script because every week I read the same paragraph from my little Word document at the end. But I'm going to say this. Oh yeah, there's one thing. I forgot to mention this at the beginning. We got nominated for an award last week week, with Hubhopper. And it's the 2024 Podcast Awards in the health and wellness category. So I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes, in the description, or whatever platform you're on. And if you fancy voting for that would be hugely appreciated. Just to see where we get with that. So thank you for that. Madness that is happening right now. So that's pretty cool. I totally forgot. If you got this far in the podcast, I imagine you're probably enjoying it. So yeah, if you want to give us a vote, there's a link in whatever description is available on the platform that you're on. So yeah, if you fancy doing that, that'd be amazingly appreciated. Thank you. So that's it. That's us finished for this episode. If anything has resonated with you in any way, then of course I would love to hear from you. That is the scripty bit that I remember. We are on social media. We're on YouTube at youtube.com/theobservingeye. We're on Patreon, which is patreon.com/theobservingeye. There's a website now, theobservingeye.com. I don't think the sign-up thing works yet. I need to fix that. I made it myself out of like duct tape and toilet roll, so it should be all right. But yeah, there's a website, and obviously everything goes on there as well. And there's There's Instagram at The Observing Eye. There's TikTok at The Observing Eye, and I think that's it. You can email me as well. You can email me, david@theobservingeye.com. That's our email address. I'm accepting emails now if you want to reach out and ask questions. That's also very cool. Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll catch you soon.
You've been listening to The Observing Eye. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I hope it's been useful. And if you're interested in any more of my writing or work around psychology, philosophy, and general day-to-day living, please go and take a look at my Substack, which is theobservingeye.com. And that's I as in the letter, not I as in the gelatinous organ through which you see. Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll catch you soon.